Everyday Samurai, Episode 18. Greetings and salutations, friends. Welcome to Everyday Samurai, in service to your liberty and the security of a free state. So glad you can join us today, and very glad indeed to have you on this journey of rediscovering the principles of justice and freedom, protected by enlightened warriors. I'm going to begin today with some words of gratitude and celebration, a shout out, if you will, for the kind email a listener recently conveyed. It shows that the message of Everyday Samurai is resonating, and there are people out there doing all they can to uphold the principles of liberty in a practical way. This particular listener titled his message, "A Simple Thank You," and relayed how his views on government and individual rights changed after serving as light infantry in Afghanistan, and that he is now in rural law enforcement with very little backup despite doing dangerous work that includes going undercover, even at times unarmed. Because of this, he has reaffirmed his commitment to training in martial arts as well as sharing the show with friends. This is the highest adulation I could ever receive. It's very humbling, and I am filled with appreciation for this kind of camaraderie. This guy gets it, and I hope you too understand that there is a community of like-minded warriors that share the vision of a world that works for everyone because of a willingness to serve in the protection of people and their property. Similarly, I hope you take the time to share the show with someone you think would benefit from this message, particularly if there's someone that has yet to adopt a principled approach or is disillusioned with the current state of affairs. It's quite easy to lose your way, particularly when buffeted about by erratic political winds, virulent media manipulations, and the incoherence of bureaucracy. Cutting through delusion is just one of the benefits that comes from internalizing the principles embedded within the nature of reality, and discovered through both samurai-edged weapons combat and the praxeological science of political economy. So armed with this dual path of scholarly and martial arts, you can actually transform an opponent's aggression into your own asset, and today we're going to do exactly that. But first, and this is particularly for those that routinely do a lot of sitting, whether it be at a desk or in a vehicle on patrol, let's take a moment to discuss the importance of unlocking your hip flexors. The psoas muscle runs from the spine to your femur, and is the main player in a matrix of muscles commonly called the hip flexors. These are deep-seated muscles that connect the lumbar region through the torso and transfers power between the upper and lower body. Aside from the heart, the psoas and the hip flexors are the most vital muscle in your body. When people say that sitting is the new smoking, they're talking about the problems incurred from atrophy, restriction, or impingement in the hip region due to inflexibility and a lack of exercise. This is something that I've been afflicted with myself and need to take deliberate action to overcome because whether you know it or not, modern lifestyles and seated culture are degenerative to your hip mobility. You need to unlock your hip flexors, and that's exactly what you can do when you go to everydaysamurai.life/unlock. This is a comprehensive yet easy to follow video program that is specifically designed to, just as the name implies, unlock your hip flexors, strengthen your psoas muscle, and restore the vitality of free-flowing energy between your upper and lower body. The health benefits from going through the Unlock Your Hip Flexors program, just 15 minutes every few days, cannot be overstated. Since these muscles are deep within your core, strengthening the hip flexors will also work wonders for your physical appearance as well. You need to go to everydaysamurai.life/unlock and counteract the negative influences of prolonged sitting today. Your health and freedom depend upon it. That's everydaysamurai.life/unlock. Check it out today. Now, looking around the realm of political discourse, it is quite easy to find ignorance, obfuscation, and distortions of the truth. If you're like me, you can easily fall into the emotional roller coaster of trying to counter these erroneous beliefs and assertions at their level. This is akin to going force on force in a physical clash, and as we learn through edged weapons combat, this is a losing strategy. From my experience, going back and forth in arguments on social media is A, a waste of time, B, emotionally frustrating, and C, mostly ineffective. Little gets resolved in this way. While the quest for liberty is a perpetual and ongoing endeavor, we should all understand that our task is first to understand principle and be a beacon of light amidst the din of confusion. After all, every adversity carries with it the seed of a greater benefit, as Napoleon Hill, author of Think and Grow Rich, states. Samurai trainer James Williams of Nami-ryu Aikiheiho echoes this sentiment when he says that the solution is always embedded in the problem. These axioms are derived from understanding the laws of nature, or the nature of reality, in the realm of time, space, and form. So it is more effective to look beyond the problem and be solutions-focused. In other words, look for the solution, knowing that it is always there. In this way, we can appreciate the appearance of any problem as an opportunity to improve our situation. As an example, I'll give great thanks to the journalist and author Jeremy Scahill for his absurdly false claims of the Second Amendment being inexorably tied to white supremacy. Fortunately, the antidote to this nonsense is readily available, and I'll get to that in a moment because the truth is indeed on the side of human liberation, and the Constitution, with all of its flaws, viewable only through our evolved understanding, was designed to secure the blessings of liberty and was a truly revolutionary political contract among people from independent administrative units cooperating with each other for mutual security. Richard Mayberry of the U.S. Early Warning Report states that the Declaration of Independence and U.S. Constitution were made in pursuit of organizing a government grounded in common law principles. This is what the reference to the laws of nature and of nature's God found in the Declaration are specifically appealing to. Law, governing the justice of human interactions based on universal principles, is already embedded in the fabric of reality, and discovered rather than made or bequeathed by government office holders acting as surrogates for the divine right of kings. Distilled to its essence, natural law is expressed with simply two sentences: do all that you have agreed to do, and do not encroach upon other people or their property. As we've discussed in the past on this show, and if you really think about it, these two laws are all that's necessary to live in peace and harmony with your neighbors. These two statements encompass contract and criminal law. Everything else in the Constitution is an operating charter of roles and responsibilities. For our purposes, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 lays out the responsibility of the militia as the governmental institution tasked with executing the laws, repelling invasions, and suppressing insurrections. As we read in the Second Amendment, these institutions are necessary to the security of a free state. Scahill is right insofar that militia duties in some states included keeping slaves in bondage. Some states had their militia performing slave patrols, and prevailing views at that time, over 200 years ago, considered some races or classes of people inferior to the point of being little better than livestock. The practice of slavery has been and remains a blight upon humanity, and worthy of revulsion, going back to biblical times with the Jews in Egypt and persisting to this day in the open-air human trade going on in Libya, following the American and NATO intervention there that toppled the Gaddafi regime. Slavery should be denounced and struck down wherever it is found in either its total or partial forms. On this we can agree with Scahill. We can also applaud him for bringing to light the archival footage of the great conservative hero and two-time U.S. President Ronald Reagan questioning the right of people to keep and bear arms. The footage I'm describing is found in the opening moments of Scahill's YouTube video entitled White Supremacy and the Second Amendment from March 6th of 2018. I'll include a link in the show notes of this episode at everydaysamurai.life/18 if you want to watch the video. While Reagan was governor of California in 1967, members of the Black Panther Party conducted an armed march on the state capitol building in protest of proposed legislation aimed at infringing upon their right to conduct armed patrols of their neighborhoods. Scahill can be thanked for reminding us that power corrupts, even for a hero of the Republican Party like Reagan, who would later go on to endorse the Brady Bill and national background checks on firearms sales. Politicians, all politicians, do not like anyone resisting their authority, particularly when they have designs on controlling your resources or actions. In the 1960s, Great Society welfare programs, holdover economic controls and price fixing particularly minimum wage laws, the disastrous Vietnam War, as well as the escalating war on narcotic property, led to racial tensions and allegations of police brutality. The Black Panthers were an attempt at local self-government, in the Jeffersonian concept of ward republics, as an alternative to the policing services imposed upon them from politicians that did not represent them. California's infringements upon the natural and constitutional rights of free people prompted outrage and backlash, or blowback if you will, borrowing a term from Chalmers Johnson and the observable trend from interventionist foreign policy. The same principle is at play for domestic affairs as well. Interventionism and the imposition of political law that violates natural law always increases conflict, whether internally or externally, at home or abroad. When governments go outside their proper sphere and role as a private property protection service and start interfering with the right of self-ownership, the unassailable right to private property and the free exercise of contract, violence results. It's kind of like boiling water. When you place a pot of cold water on the stove and look inside, the water may be cool and calm, yet there are unobservable chemical reactions taking place that will inevitably yield turbulence. If left unchanged, the water will boil and even spill over. This is why the war on drugs, as evidenced by the disproportionate prison population for drug offenses in the United States, draws more resources than ever before. The oppression needs to escalate in order to keep a lid on things. The spillover effect is also evidenced by the dissipation of resources and national energies into foreign interventionism. But that's a subject for another episode. While Scahill starts off strong, he goes off the rails when trying to assert that the Second Amendment and the militia tradition is rooted in white supremacy. Even in his own example, it was legislative infringements upon rights protected by the Second Amendment, the euphemistically named gun control, that prompted the Black Panthers to march on the California State Capitol building in 1967. It was the denial of self-government provided through the Republican form of government guaranteed by the Constitution that created this revolt. And it was the prior economic interventions that raised tensions in the black neighborhoods of Los Angeles. In other words, it was not the Second Amendment that is rooted in white supremacy, but the suppression of natural rights through political law that destroys social harmony between disparate groups. Fortunately, the colonial and constitutional history of the militia system supports self-government and authentic federalism, even today. Like the 10th Amendment, the Second Amendment can also be used to decentralize power through the federal system and restore home rule. To explain this in detail, I will now turn to Dr. Edwin Vieira and an article he wrote in 2005. Before I do, let me encourage you to get on the everydaysamurai.life mailing list to stay informed and keep up with the latest insights to empower your victorious life. As a bonus, I'm offering a free ebook on how to build your own 72-hour survival kit. So sign up today at everydaysamurai.life. Now on to Dr. Vieira's article, The Constitutional Militia, Slavery, and Contemporary Gun Control. Studying the colonial and state militia acts of the 1600s and 1700s reveals a stark divergence between the principles of the constitutional militia of the several states and the principles of contemporary gun control. Not entirely obvious, though, yet crucial to the survival of freedom in America, is what this divergence represents. The fundamental operational principle of the constitutional militia is that everyone who is physically able is required to be armed with his own personal military-grade firearm, ammunition, and necessary accoutrements in his own possession at home and ready to repel invasions, suppress rebellions and insurrections, and enforce the laws, especially against usurpation and tyranny. The colonial and state militia acts of the pre-constitutional period generally did exempt from routine militia musters and training some people who held high public offices, or who were engaged in particularly important professions or trades. Nonetheless, most of these individuals were required by law to arm themselves and to appear for service during alarms. For a typical example, Georgia's Militia Act of 1755 mandated that, quote, Every male person from the age of 16 to 60 years who has once resided and shall be within this province for the space of 3 months, slaves excepted, is liable to bear arms, except the several persons herein after particularly mentioned, who shall be excused and exempted from appearing at general and ordinary musters, that is to say, all members of His Majesty's Council and their officers, the members of the Assembly and their officers, the Chief Justice and Justices of the Court of Common Pleas, the Attorney General, the attorneys of the said court, the Clerk of the Crown and Pleas, the Provost Marshal, the Master and Register of the High Court of Chancery, the Judge of the Vice Admiralty, the officers of His Majesty's Customs, the Surveyor General of His Majesty's Lands in this province, the clergy, the catechist of Savannah, the Public Treasurer, Powder Receiver, Comptrollers, Waiters and Commissary, His Majesty's Justices of the Peace, provided that all these persons, the members of His Majesty's Honorable Council and of the Assembly and their officers, and the pilots and ferrymen only excepted, shall in the time of rebellion, insurrection, or actual invasion, attend under the proper colors of the company, completed, armed, and furnished, on pain of forfeiting the sum of 10 pounds sterling. Close quote. These special exemptions, however, were matters of statutory grace, not of legal right. Militiamen were not volunteers. Every male person from the age of 16 to 60 years was required to serve, and to be excused required a special reason recognized by the legislature. Georgia's Militia Act of 1755 illustrates the general requirements enforced through the colonies and independent states that, quote, "The chaplain shall enlist and enroll the names of all the male inhabitants of this province from the age of 16 to 60 years, and those persons shall be obliged to appear at musters. Every person liable to appear and bear arms at any muster exercising or training shall constantly keep at his usual place of abode and bring with him at such muster, exercise, or training 1 gun or musket fit for service, 1 cartridge box with at least 9 cartridges filled with good gunpowder, and ball that shall fit his piece, a horn or flask containing at least 1/4 pound of gunpowder, and a shot pouch with bullets proportionable to the gunpowder, 1 worm and picker, 4 square flints, a bayonet sword, or hatchet of the fitness and sufficiency of which arms every commanding officer of the company is to be the judge. In case any person liable to appear and bear arms shall neglect or refuse to appear, completely armed and furnished, at any general muster, every person shall forfeit and pay a sum not exceeding 10 shillings sterling. And in case any such person shall neglect or refuse to appear, at every ordinary muster every such person shall forfeit and pay a sum not exceeding 5 shillings. It shall and may be lawful for the commission officers 6 times in a year at any convenient time of the day to repair to the places of residence of any person or persons, as well as those persons who are obliged to appear on alarms, as to other persons liable to bear arms, and to demand a sight of their arm, furniture, ammunition, and accoutrements. And in case persons shall refuse to produce any such arms, furniture, ammunition, and accoutrements, or to suffer the same to be viewed and inspected, or if when produced the said officers shall find the same defective, they may fine every person offending in any sum not exceeding 5 shillings sterling. Close quote. As this statute shows, the duty to keep and bear arms had no limitation or qualification, but obliged every male inhabitant from 16 to 60 years of age to arm himself and appear for musters, training, and service in the field. The lower and upper boundaries of age the statute set on the duties to arm, muster, train, and serve were intended only to reflect practical presumptions about physical ability and psychological maturity, not to impose arbitrary discriminations. Georgia's Militia Act specifically called to service men from 16 to 60 years of age with the expectation that they would prove both capable in skills and sufficient in numbers to do what was required of them. But those boundaries were never meant to be exclusive. Neither in Georgia nor in any other colony or independent state did any Militia Act ever decree that any free and loyal person under 16 or over 60, or whatever the particular ages happened to be, could not possess a firearm, ammunition, and accoutrements suitable for militia service, or any other legitimate purpose for that matter. Or that anyone between 16 and 60 who was physically unable to train or serve in the field could not possess a firearm, or that anyone over 60 could not volunteer for militia service, or would never be required to serve in case of an alarm, or even that women could not possess, and if absolutely necessary in an emergency, use firearms for the common defense or self-defense. The militia acts of pre-constitutional times mandated no licensing requirements for the inhabitants' private possession of arms. They established no general control over firearms by public officials. To the contrary, firearms were required to be in every man's own hands, at his usual place of abode. No one worried about being punished for possessing a firearm and ammunition. Rather, penalties attached for not having them always available in good working order. No one feared that public officials would conduct house-to-house searches to find and take away armaments. Instead, a cite could be demanded only to make sure that every man actually had immediately accessible to him, at home, a suitable, functioning firearm and ammunition for his own personal use. And public officials were concerned not that the people possessed too many firearms, but they had too few. None of this was extraordinary in the political context. The pre-constitutional militia acts enforced the duty of each individual to keep and bear arms, which derived from and put into general effect for the benefit of society as a whole, the unalienable right to each individual to keep and bear arms for personal self-defense, what the Founding Fathers' legal mentor, William Blackstone, called the natural right of resistance and self-preservation, when the sanctions of society and laws are found insufficient to restrain the violence of oppression. Indeed, if Americans had enjoyed no right to keep and bear arms, that is, no legal claim to arm themselves against the contrary commands of public officials, they could never have imagined themselves entitled, empowered, or enabled to employ arms to suppress, oppose, or even deter usurpation and tyranny. The principle in operation was that the only truly free men are armed, because an armed citizenry is necessary to maintain a free society. As the Second Amendment came to summarize the idea, quote, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. A free state is one with a well-regulated militia, and a well-regulated militia is one composed of all the people actually exercising their right to keep and bear arms, with no infringement by public officials. Arms in every citizen's personal possession are the precondition for freedom. Freedom, the hoped-for consequence of such possession if the militia do their part, and public officials can do nothing to interfere with such possession, being limited in their authority to ensuring that, through and in the militia, everyone obtains and maintains private possession of firearms suitable for defending individual liberty and social order. In Georgia, however, as in most colonies and independent states, not everyone was free to possess firearms, because not everyone was free in other ways. As the Militia Act of 1755 itself recited, every able male person from the age of 16 to 60 years, who has once resided and shall be within this province for the space of 3 months, slaves excepted, is liable to bear arms. Thus, the emphasized words turned the researcher to the colonial law of slavery. Georgia's Slavery Act of 1765, for example, explained itself on the rather blatant theory of legalistic oppression that, quote, slavery has been introduced and allowed in His Majesty's colonies in America, and power over such slaves ought to be settled and limited by positive laws, so that the slaves may be kept in due subjection and obedience, close quote. The act went on to provide, quote, that it shall not be lawful for any slave, unless in the presence of some white person, to carry and make use of firearms, or any offensive weapon whatsoever, unless such slave shall have a ticket or license in writing from his master, mistress, or overseer to hunt, and that such license be renewed every month, or unless there be some white person of the age of 16 years or upwards in the company of such slave when he is hunting or shooting, or that such slave be actually carrying his master's arms to or from his master's plantation by a special ticket for that purpose, or unless such slave be found in the daytime actually keeping off birds within the plantation, to which such slave belongs lodging the same gun at night within the dwelling house of his master, mistress, or white overseer, provided also that no slave shall have liberty to carry any gun, cutlass, pistol, or other offensive weapon abroad at any time between Saturday evening after sunset and Monday morning before sunrise, notwithstanding a license or ticket for doing. And in any case, any person shall find any slave using or carrying firearms or other offensive weapon contrary to this act, such person may lawfully seize and take away such offensive weapon or firearms." Close quote. The connection between theory and practice in this statute was as inevitable as it is obvious. Those kept in due subjection and obedience could not be suffered to possess firearms without strict supervision and restraint, lest they attempt to employ those firearms to free themselves from that subjection and obedience. So, slaves' access to and use of firearms were strictly licensed or otherwise controlled in order to minimize the number of firearms available to them, to keep track of which slaves had access to which firearms and for what purposes, to limit the uses to which slaves could put firearms, to make sure that the selfsame firearms made available to slaves during the day were returned to their master's control at night, when presumably the danger of insurrection was most acute, and to subject to seizure all unlicensed firearms and any firearms possessed outside of permissible places or during prohibited periods. Under such circumstances, though even slaves could be armed for service with the militia during contingencies, for example, Georgia's Militia Act of 1755 allowed, quote, that certain slaves whom their masters deemed particularly reliable shall in time of general alarm and actual invasion, and not otherwise be armed, by their respective owners, with one sufficient gun, one hatchet, powder horn, and shot pouch, with ammunition of powder and bullets for 20 rounds and 6 spare flints, and shall be sent to the place of rendezvous of the respective companies. And instead of pecuniary fining, such slaves for breach or neglect of duty shall be subject to corporal punishment, and meritorious service was rewarded. For every Negro or other slave who shall actually engage the enemy in times of invasion and shall kill any one of the enemy, or take a prisoner alive, or shall take any of their colors, shall be free and absolutely discharged from all slavery whatsoever, and the owner of such slaves shall be satisfied for the full value thereof out of the public treasury. Close quote. This remained the practice on the eve of the War of Independence. Nonetheless, armed service with the militia depended entirely on a slave's proven political reliability, as evidenced by his master's recommendation. No one else in colonial America required a recommendation from some alleged superior before he could possess a military-grade firearm, and no one else could keep and bear such a firearm only in time of general alarm and actual invasion, and not otherwise. That the only general exception in colonial statutes to the right of individuals to keep and bear arms applied exclusively to slaves supports 3 conclusions. First, the principle of slavery, that men kept in due subjection and obedience must be disarmed, is the opposite of and antagonistic to the principle of the militia, that free men are armed. Second, general gun control, whereby most individuals in society are disarmed unless licensed or otherwise regulated by some select group of supposed superiors, is destructive of the militia. Third, general gun control can be justified only on the theory that the individuals disarmed are thereby rightfully to be kept in due subjection and obedience. Now, the exception to the right of individuals to keep and bear arms found in the slave states, namely, that those states could completely and permanently disarm the class of individuals held in bondage, continued after ratification of the Constitution, because slavery persisted in those states. And, as the militia remained the militia of the several states, even Congress could not employ its power under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16, to arm slaves in contradiction of state laws that sanctioned the peculiar institution. Therefore, Congress never attempted to do so. In 1865, however, the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery in most cases. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Because slavery was, as Georgia's statute in 1765 attested, a matter of positive law, that is, because the legal existence of slavery required a statute within the competence of the legislature to enact, when the 13th Amendment limited the imposition of slavery to a punishment for crime, it necessarily stripped both the state legislatures and Congress of any purported power to impose slavery or any of its peculiar badges and incidents for any other purpose. General gun control was an important badge and incident of slavery. Indeed, the most crucial of all, because without it, the slaves could not possibly have been kept in due subjection and obedience. Therefore, today, the 13th Amendment must outlaw all general gun control, except as to those individuals who have actually been duly convicted of crime, and for their punishment have been sentenced to a term of slavery or involuntary servitude, during which they may be kept in due subjection and obedience by being disarmed, even after being released from prison. What violations of law may rightfully be considered a crime deserving of slavery or involuntary servitude is, however, another question. Arguably, a felony, as understood in the colonies, that is, an offense which occasions a total forfeiture of either lands or goods, or both, at the common law, and to which capital or other punishment may be superadded according to the degree of guilt, could qualify. In any event, the 13th Amendment's implicit limitation on general gun control puts sharp teeth in the explicit guarantee of the Second Amendment that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. For vanishingly few Americans would knowingly tolerate the imposition of any of the badges and incidents of slavery or involuntary servitude as punishment for any but the most serious crimes and the most hardened recidivistic offenders. And teeth are surely necessary in light of the parallels between the law of slavery as it applies to firearms and contemporary proposals for general gun control. The law of slavery denied slaves any legal right to possess firearms and minimized the number of arms available to them. Contemporary gun control presumes that Congress and the state legislatures enjoy the power to disarm anyone and everyone, invents more and more classes of individuals to be disqualified from possessing firearms, and designates more and more types of firearms, the private possession of which is to be forbidden. The law of slavery carefully tracked which slaves had access to which firearms, and for what purposes. Contemporary gun control demands that common Americans must be licensed to possess firearms, and must register those they possess. The law of slavery limited to such non-military activities as hunting the uses to which slaves could put firearms. Contemporary gun control seeks to ban all firearms for which politicians and bureaucrats claim to see no sporting purposes, especially those of proven military value, such as so-called assault weapons, 50 caliber rifles and accurate high-powered rifles with telescopic sights, now being demonized in the media as sniper rifles. The law of slavery required that the firearms slaves were allowed to use during the day always be returned to their master's control every night. Contemporary gun control proposes that all privately owned firearms be secured in governmentally supervised storage until withdrawn for governmentally approved sport, and then promptly returned. The law of slavery subjected to seizure all unlicensed firearms in slaves' hands and any firearms slaves possessed outside of permissible places or during prohibited periods. Contemporary gun control insists on nothing less for everyone except the armed forces and the police, as well as confiscation of all firearms of prohibited types in private hands. These parallels illustrate that general gun control is nothing less than a political program aimed at reimposing the most crucial badge and incident of slavery on everyone, other than an elitist leadership class and its armed guardians, in order thereby to remove the ultimate deterrent to and defense against that class's usurpation and tyranny, and keep common Americans perpetually in due subjection and obedience. A slave, of course, can never complain of usurpation or tyranny because slavery is the very perfection of usurpation and tyranny. Nowhere in America are these parallels more glaring and shocking than in the District of Columbia. The district prides itself on being a city in which African Americans, the vast majority of whom are probably to some degree descendants of Southern slaves, hold high political, economic, and social positions. And it is the nation's capital, yet all of this notwithstanding, the residents of the District of Columbia suffer from gun control, that in its thoroughgoing oppressiveness embodies the essence of the exorbitant powers claimed by antebellum Southern slavery. How is one to explain this antinomy? That the district's public office holders, police officials, and other influential people of African American descent who stump for gun control are just handkerchief-head Uncle Toms shuffling for the establishment. In some instances, venal collaboration may be the answer. In most cases, though, the culprit is more likely vincible ignorance. A negative cultural conditioning, too, may play a role. These people simply do not understand what freedom promises, entails, and especially requires. They do not know the history of this country or their own history, and knowing neither, they cannot read and apply the Constitution intelligently. That burden of ignorance, unfortunately, is a problem all too many other Americans share with them. True, it is correctable, but the time for correction is running out, for all of us together." Close quote. Reading Dr. Vieira's article reminds me of the great Roman poet Lucan, whose full name was Marcus Annaeus Lucanus, who said the purpose of the sword in the hands of men is so that none may be slaves. Friends, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Everyday Samurai, and look forward to seeing you next time. Be sure to subscribe to our feed so as to stay up to date with our newest offerings. If you like what you've heard here, give us a thumbs up or a 5-star review. Share it with a friend or someone you think would benefit from the message. Remember to get our Tactical Pen Basics Manual as a bonus with the purchase of any tactical pen at shop.everydaysamurai.life. You'll get a great tool for your everyday carry and some great reading on mindset, training, and tactics as well. That's shop.everydaysamurai.life. Get yours today and carry it with you wherever you go. Until next time, stay sharp, stay aware, and be well.